How do you do, dear viewers? Have you seen koalas in a zoo? They seem to be quite popular and attracting lots of attention of Japanese and are making good contribution in bringing together Australia and Japan. I don't have to emphasize, I believe, that Australia is indeed a very important country to Japan as a supplier of much of natural resources that we consume, and also as a close partner in the Pacific Basin area, which has a very bright future in the entire world. So koalas were indeed a very timely gift from Australia. However, we cannot afford to be content with the success which were brought about by those koalas. International relations should be made of much sterner stuff, if I may quote from Shakespeare. So today we would like to talk about bilateral relations between Australia and Japan after the koala. As a guest, we have in our studio Mr. Gilbert George, who is the director of the Japan office of Japan-Australia Foundation. Mr. George, nice to have you in this program.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here.
I know your foundation is making a very active contribution to the Australia-Japan relations. Could you briefly tell us about your organization?
Yes, the Australia-Japan Foundation was set up in 1976 by the Australian government, and the government set the foundation up in recognition of the extremely important role that Japan plays in relation to Australia and indeed the world, of course. Australia sells much of its raw materials to Japan and in turn buys a lot of its requirements, manufactured requirements from Japan. And the government in its wisdom saw the value of developing a foundation which would concentrate on the bilateral relationship, that is the relationship between Australia and Japan. And we were established in Australia in 1976, first in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, and subsequently in Sydney. Now the Japan office has been operating for 4 years. It was established in 1980.
What are the objectives of your organization? It's mainly in the cultural exchange?
Yes, our prime objectives are to really broaden the base of understanding between Australians and Japanese by a very wide-ranging cultural program. Not only do we get involved in exchanges of artists and potters, but we try and really take the broadest meaning of the word cultural exchange, and we would include sporting exchanges, exchanges of media people, exchanges of youth, particularly the young people of both countries. We believe should be encouraged to visit the host country and to really learn about the other country.
I know that many Australians are studying Japanese, and this is, I believe, is one of the area of your exchange activities, this study of Japanese language.
Yes, I think the study of Japanese is become very, very popular in Australia over the last 4 or 5 years, because Australians are becoming more and more to realize that although we have our history is based in Europe, we have a very strong and bright future in the Western European area, and particularly in partnership with Japan. And many people recognize this, and I think Australia is now the second or third country in the world for studying and learning Japanese language.
I was told that more Australians study Japanese than any other country per population. I think we Japanese should appreciate that.
Yes, apart from Japan itself, where every single student studies Japanese language, Australia is, I think, the second or third in the world, and the quality of the language training in Australia is quite high as well. Amongst, I think, 20,000 students of Japanese in Australia, there are many who are studying at university level, and are now, some of them, reaching the stage where they can become simultaneous interpreters. One or two people I know have become that good.
Australia used to be a rather distant country from Japan, geographically as well as culturally too. But I was told that this has already changed by the rather rapid increase of visitors from Japan to your country.
Yes, last year there were over 85,000 visitors from Japan going to Australia, primarily for tourist reasons, but many businessmen also, of course. In the next 3 years, that figure is projected to increase to something like 300,000. That is a more than threefold increase in 3 years. That, I think, indicates the tremendous interest which is now developing amongst Japanese people about Australia.
Well, that is really a remarkable rate of increase, and if it goes on at that rate, I think that Australia will soon become a very close friend to Japan as much as the United States is to us, which is, of course, to the good, because Australia is indeed a very important friend in the Pacific area.
Yes, Australia, I think, has much to offer. Although Australia is a small country, we believe that we have a certain amount of expertise and also a certain amount of good standing, goodwill amongst people of the Western Pacific, and we believe that in partnership with Japan, which is the major economic country within that region, we will be able to develop many useful projects in the future. And these projects, of course, rely on a very strong mutual understanding, and that's where I see the role of my foundation becoming very important.
Now, talking about culture, some Japanese think that Australia is rather barren of culture, but I think that is also no longer the picture there. I know there are well-known novelists in Australia too, like Patrick White, who received Nobel Prize.
Yes.
And these days, some rock singers in Australia are very popular in Japan among young people.
Yes.
So could you tell us about the Australian culture, how unique it is, and I think what really are the so-called indigenous Australian culture?
Well, I think until about 20 years ago, the main source of Australian culture came from outside of Australia in many ways. Very often major opera companies or musical ensembles would tour Australia and go home, and that would be the end of the cultural event.
That's imported culture.
Imported culture, yes, but particularly in the last 20 years, with a considerable amount of assistance from various government bodies, Australia has developed a very strong Australianized culture, and as you say, there are many novelists who have now gained worldwide recognition. Patrick White, Xavier Herbert, Thomas Keneally, to name but a few. In the field of rock music also, as you mentioned, Australia has really began to make its own mark in the world. There are rock groups like Men at Work and Air Supply who now have gained worldwide recognition, and I think people recognize them as world-class bands, but they are quite surprised to find that they also come from Australia. And I think this is an indication of the relative newness of this vitality, which is only just indicating that Australia is coming of age in the field of culture.
Now, what do you think set Australian culture apart from others? For example, what are the characteristics of, for example, Australian literature, like those by the authors that you have mentioned, that are really, I should say, characteristic of Australia?
There are many reasons why Australia has developed its own unique culture. First of all, I might say that the cultural aspects of Australia are still developing, as they are in all countries around the world, but Australia has a rather unique background in that it is one of the so-called empty countries, as the United States and Canada were many years ago, but Australia is the only empty country which exists within the Western Pacific or the Asian region. It also has a unique mixture of people from many, many different countries, and that combination of wide open spaces and of a very mixed background, really an Australian can be from any one of 120 other countries around the world. That combination of the wide open spaces, the polyglot community, plus the very young nature, we don't have a long history, but therefore we have to be forward-looking, and those three things we really contribute a lot to our current development of cultural characteristics.
Those factors that you mentioned are not necessarily very favorable ones from the viewpoint of culture.
From the viewpoint of Australians, I think they are the very important ingredients from which our culture has developed, and certainly in relation to Japan, which has a small country with thousands of years of history, and shall we say, a monocultural society. It would be very difficult to see the Australian way of life transposed into Japan. I think, as you say, those conditions which helped to develop Australia's culture are very unusual from a Japanese viewpoint.
Certainly, we two countries are very, very much in contrast, almost two countries in reverse. And that may be the aspect which attracts the Japanese people to your country.
Yes, I think particularly the things which, to my knowledge, attract Japanese visitors to Australia are things like the wide open spaces. Australia is 23 times the size of Japan in area, and yet there is only 1/5 or slightly less population. So really we have many wide open spaces. The other thing which attracts particularly Japanese visitors is the friendliness and the informality of the Australian way of life, and also the safety. Australia is a very safe country to travel in, and that really contributes towards the appeal of Australia.
Why do you think it was possible for Australia to bring into existence and such success the rock groups and rock singers? It may be a rather strange question, but it at least to me, it seems to be quite unexpected, almost a surprise.
Well, I think the one answer lies in the vitality and the youth of Australia itself. It is a young country. We don't have very strong traditions binding us. So our young rock musicians, and also because we have a history of importing people into Australia to become Australians, it's very easy for our rock people, our rock musicians, to take some characteristics of, say, English or American music, and then inject it with the vitality of the Australian way of life, almost, and this then develops an almost a unique Australian style rock music, which is, as the Australian people are, very frank, very open sort of music, and does not have is not complicated in any way, but as I've told many Japanese people, Australians are very happy to speak their minds. They do not beat about the bush, as we say.
Well, another thing that is unique in Australia is this environmental movement or the anti-nuclear movement. They seem to be quite strong, maybe stronger than other developed countries, as we saw in the last election, at least the success of this new party. Do you think this sort of peace movement and this environmental movement will continue to be active and prosperous in Australia?
I think that will depend. First of all, yes, at the elections several months ago, the Nuclear Disarmament Party caused some concern amongst the already established political parties. And I think that reflects a feeling amongst the Australian people that they of pride with the beautiful environment, the clear air, the very unpolluted condition of Australia, and I think with that background, the Nuclear Disarmament Party attracted many sympathy votes. Whether or not it continues to be a political force will depend on whether the Nuclear Disarmament Party can establish policies in other important areas, such as welfare and employment policy and maybe industrial development policy. Those areas must also be considered by the Nuclear Disarmament Party if it is to continue or to grow as a political force in Australian politics.
So it is rooted in the love of nature, because you have such a vast and
yes.
beautiful nature.
Yes, I think Australians do, although many Australians do not realise that we have a very close association with nature, and much of our lifestyle, in fact, is spent in the outdoors, communing with nature, so to speak. Many people go to the beach and use the water and the bush of Australia, and many holidays are spent in the countryside, maybe camping or some other form of activity which involves appreciating Australian nature.
I believe that is another aspect that will attract Japanese, particularly young people, to your country.
Yes, the nature and the vast open spaces, as I mentioned, are very attractive to Japanese people, I believe.
We have relatively little time to talk about economic relations, which are very important.
Yes.
We import a large amount of raw material, energy, iron ore, coal, and beef, sugar. I guess we depend upon supply from Australia for as much as 50–60% of our total import. So really, Australia is, in that respect, is very important, and our economic relations are, I should say, complementary to each other. Are there any problems, recent problems in the area of trade between the two countries?
As you said, until very recently, the trade was a very complementary nature in that Australia supplied raw materials for the heavy industries of Japan. We supplied over 60% of the coal, 50% of the iron ore, over 50%, closer to 60% of the aluminium. So half the windows in Japan are made from Australian aluminium, or conversely, half of every window is made from aluminium, imported from Australia. Then I think 3 or 4 years ago, the Japanese industrial structure began to change with the so-called Keihaku Tansho, I think is the smaller, lighter, more energy conscious type mentality.
High technology.
The high technology era is, I think, creating some problems in changeover, but only very minor problems in terms of Australian long-term trade with Japan. I think Australia will continue to be an important supplier, the most important supplier of raw materials, and Japan will continue to be a very important supplier of products to Australia. I think some of the future problems, well, some people are saying that there will be problems in the future because of the huge trade deficits between Japan and America, that America might try and force Japan to buy raw materials at uneconomic prices. But I don't believe that will be an issue because the Japanese business people are very rational, and when they come to make their decisions to purchase raw materials on the world market, they will always purchase from the most economic source, and that source is primarily Australia.
Are there any grievance in Australia about the inroad of a large amount of manufactured goods?
I don't think so, because one of the growth areas in trade between Australia and Japan has been in investment, particularly a lot of Japanese direct investment into Australia, and that much of that investment has been in the form of joint ventures for producing automobiles. And so although Australia imports a lot of 100% made in Japan goods, there are also many cars and other finished goods which are produced in Australia under joint venture contracts between Australian firms and Japanese firms.
How about this investment? As you mentioned, I guess we have made lots of investment in Australia, mainly in the resource production areas and some of the manufacturing areas.
Yes.
This investment is still continuing?
Yes,
from Japan?
There is ongoing commitments for projects which already have been started, of course, but there are other new areas opening up, which I believe in the future will be quite exciting for Japanese investors interested in investing in Australia. Those particularly will be in the tourist area. I think the growth in the tourism industry in Australia presents many golden opportunities for Japanese investors. And in addition, there are many Japanese investors now interested in what we call the securities market, investment in government bonds in Australia. And that market has also been growing quite rapidly in the last few years.
Yeah, you have such very beautiful tourist resources, I should say, like Ayers Rock and Great Barrier Reef.
Yes.
But sometimes people say that there aren't enough tourist facilities. So that is another area where this investment is going to be made.
Yes, even now there are many, 2 or 3 large Japanese companies making investments in tourist facilities in preparation for the coming tourist boom, and I think they're making very wise investments, in my own opinion.
I understand that you are celebrating bicentennial
Yes.
in several years from now. And what would you say are the most important thing from the viewpoint of the bilateral relations after the Koala?
After
you only
the,
have
yes,
30 minutes, 30 seconds or so.
right.
It's maybe difficult for you to say.
I believe that the relationships between Australia and Japan will now, that the Koala has really exposed Australia to the Japanese, I believe that the relationships will deepen and become far stronger on the basis of mutual development of mutual relationships and development of people-to-people contacts.
Well, thank you very much. We enjoyed this talk very much, and I'm sure that we have even closer relation with your country in the future.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, Mr. Gilbert.